Welcome back to the channel, everyone! I have another book review coming at you. This time it's more contemporary and kinda trippy. That's right, I'm talking about Kurt Vonnegut's Slaughterhouse-Five, a book my dad has been begging me to read for the past decade of my life. You know how it goes. I'm going to start with the summary of the book, some thoughts on the elements of plot and narrative, and finish it off with a final rating of the book. Without further ado, let's jump right in! Billy Pilgrim is a pretty average dude, aside from the fact that he's unstuck in time. He decides to enroll in optometry school, but right afterwards he's drafted for World War II. During the Battle of the Bulge, he's taken as a prisoner of war and starts absolutely tripping. Okay, not really, but weird stuff happens. All of a sudden, he's just casually strolling through different times in his life like it's no big deal. Just a heads up. The story is not told very linearly, and it's a bit confusing if I don't explain the plot chronologically, so I'm going to try my best to explain it in the order that it would normally happen. Also, since this is a chronological recount of the tale, I'm going to drop the spoiler warning here. There's a lot that's covered out of order, so if you don't want to be spoiled, pause the video, read, and come back. Go ahead, I'll wait. Alright, after he's taken as a POW, Billy's transferred to a lovely camp in beautiful Dresden with nice, fancy, shiny English prisoners who are treated very well, where he promptly laughs at a live Cinderella show so hard that people are a little scared, so they put him in a hospital and drug him up with morphine, and then he starts absolutely tripping with real excitement because he's on morphine. After he's done having fun with drugs, Billy begins work in a syrup factory. All the laborers there have secret spoons hidden there, so he... Wait. Dresden. Doesn't something like really horrible happen in this camp? Okay, so turns out the Allied forces absolutely decimate Dresden, so it goes. But luckily for little old Billy, he was in a meat locker underground when it happened. Since he and a few others are the sole survivors, their reward is to mine up all the dead bodies from the ground. Thankfully, before the book has the chance to explain the grotesqueness of the situation, because trust me, it will not hesitate to, the Russians come and liberate Billy and he gets to go home. After this point, Billy becomes a bit older, finishes school, goes to a mental hospital for a little bit, gets married, and has some horrid PTSD flashbacks to the war. Oh, I almost forgot to mention, he gets kidnapped and put on display naked for some aliens that live in the fourth dimension. They're even nice enough to give him a mate. These aliens are called Tralfamadorians, and they turn out to be pretty chill. Billy returns to Earth at some point and gets into a plane crash. His wife dies of carbon monoxide poisoning on the way to visit him at the hospital. So it goes. And he finally decides to speak up about his kidnapping. He goes on talk shows, annoys the crap out of his daughter, and eerily makes everyone slightly uncomfortable by announcing when he's going to die. Turns out one of his vengeful fellow prisoners heard about how he indirectly killed his friend and eventually hires a hitman to kill him. He describes death as a, quote, violet hum. And he doesn't really mind it, because he knows he'll eventually be thrown into a time where he's alive again. The biggest element of the plot is the fact that this story is not chronological. Billy time travels a ton throughout the story, and in a way it made the story a bit confusing, but at the same time it kept me entertained. It was really intriguing to see a character who knows the ending of his own story. He remains, for the most part, completely calm and at peace with what happens because he's intent on focusing on the positive. This is something the Tralfamadorians teach him when he's kidnapped. Billy's attitude towards life is definitely unorthodox, but it makes him, in my opinion, that much more lovable. I think comedy is a really enjoyable part of the story. In hindsight, Slaughterhouse-Five really covers some deep stuff. The comedy serves to balance the depression out of it, and it does it well. There's literally an entire paragraph explaining how Billy shits when he coughs, relates it to Newton's third law of motion, and then at the end barely mentions how this could be useful for rocket science. It's so random. Oh, and that Cinderella performance Billy laughs so hard at that he's sent to the prison hospital? The book has a little excerpt from that play. Goodness me, the clock has struck. Alack day and My luck. I've never heard or seen this rendition of Cinderella, but I really want to see it. Overall, I think the execution of this unique narrative style is successful, and while it's a bit confusing, I think it's worth it to stick through to the end. Oedipus Rex was my last rad book, and I gotta be honest, I think I prefer that one a bit more. Not to say that this one was bad by any means. I enjoyed this book a bunch, and it's extremely unique. But I don't know. There was just something about Oedipus Rex that I really liked. It was more telling of a culture that maybe a lot of people didn't really know about. With that being said, my final rating of Slaughterhouse-Five by Kurt Vonnegut is a solid 7.5 out of 10. It has great comedic value and interesting storytelling. It's a solid choice if you enjoy both historic fiction and science fiction. This book has its fair share of both.